My husband's ex-girlfriend kept sabotaging my projects and telling coworkers she'd remind my husband that he married the wrong person. I got her blacklisted from our entire industry. I've been working at this pharmaceutical company for 8 years and worked my way up to Senior Director of Clinical Research. My husband Tom and I met at a conference 5 years ago when he was presenting his research on autoimmune disorders. We got married 2 years later, and everything was perfect. Tom always mentioned his high school girlfriend Ashley when we talked about our pasts. They dated all through high school and college. Then she dumped him to move to Paris for some art thing. He was devastated but eventually got over it and focused on his career. I didn't think much about her until she showed up at my office 3 months ago. She was interviewing for a research coordinator position in my department. I recognized her from old photos Tom had shown me. She acted like she had no idea who I was during the interview. Her resume was actually impressive. She had a chemistry degree and 5 years of lab experience. My boss Keith loved her and wanted to hire her immediately. I couldn't say no without looking petty, so she started the next week. First day, Ashley comes to my office and says we should clear the air. She tells me she knows I'm married to Tom and she's totally over him, just needed a job and my company had the best opening. She said she hoped we could be professional. I believed her because why would she come back after 10 years just to mess with my marriage? But then little things started happening. She'd bring up stories about Tom from high school during team meetings, like we'd be discussing protocols and she'd randomly say something reminded her of when Tom did this or that in chemistry class. She friend requested all my coworkers on social media and started posting old photos of her and Tom from when they were teenagers. She'd tag people from my team asking if they could believe how cute they were together. Then she started making mistakes that only affected my projects. She'd mess up the sample labeling on my trials but never anyone else's. She'd forget to submit my reports but remember everyone else's. When I confronted her, she'd apologize and say she was still adjusting to the new systems. Keith started noticing my projects were falling behind and asked what was going on. Ashley was in the meeting and acted all concerned, offering to help me get back on track. She made it look like I was the one struggling. The worst part was when Tom's mom Helen came to visit us. Ashley somehow found out and showed up at the restaurant where we were having dinner. She acted shocked to see us and Helen was so excited to see her after all these years. Ashley sat down with us and spent the whole dinner talking about their relationship and how Tom proposed to her in college, but she turned him down. Tom looked uncomfortable, but Helen kept asking questions. Ashley actually said she regretted leaving Tom and wondered what could have been. After that dinner, Ashley started texting Tom. Just friendly stuff at first, asking how his mom was, sending articles about research. Tom showed me everything, but I could tell he was flattered by the attention. She'd ask him to get coffee to catch up, and he'd ask me if it was okay. I always said yes because I didn't want to look like the jealous wife. Then I found out from my coworker Rita that Ashley had been telling people she was only working there temporarily until Tom realized he married the wrong person. Rita heard her on the phone saying she just needed a few more months to remind Tom what they had. That's when I decided to end this. I started by being extra helpful to Ashley. I volunteered her for every terrible project that came up. The boring data entry studies that took months. The failed trials that needed extensive documentation. The compliance audits that required working with our worst clients. I told Keith she was eager to prove herself and could handle the extra work. Ashley couldn't say no without looking bad. Then I recommended her for a special assignment with our partner company in Japan. 3-month minimum, potentially extending to a year. I told Keith she'd mentioned wanting international experience, and this was perfect for her career growth. Keith thought I was being so supportive of my team member. Ashley tried to decline, but Keith said this was an incredible opportunity, and rejecting it would show she wasn't serious about advancing. While she was panicking about Japan, I did some digging on her previous job. Found out she was let go for having an inappropriate relationship with her married boss. She'd actually done this before, trying to break up marriages. I reached out to her previous coworkers and got all the details. 3 different people confirmed she'd stalked the man's wife and tried to sabotage her. I compiled everything into a neat little folder. The day before Ashley was supposed to leave for Japan, she came to my office crying. She started crying harder and talking about how she just wanted closure after all these years, how seeing Tom again made her realize she'd made the biggest mistake of her life leaving him. I let her go on for exactly 30 seconds while I counted in my head. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the folder I'd been building for the past 2 weeks, and slid it across my desk. I told her I knew about her previous married boss, about the stalking, about the 3 coworkers who confirmed her pattern of breaking up marriages. Ashley's face went completely white. She reached for the folder with shaking hands and opened it. Inside were printed emails, testimony from Cyrus Gallegos, who'd been her supervisor at the last company, statements from 2 other coworkers who watched her target a married department head for 18 months. She tried to explain that situation was different, that the boss pursued her first, that I didn't understand the context. I cut her off and told her the Japan assignment was her only option now, because I was taking this folder to HR either way. She could leave the country for 3 months and maybe keep this quiet. Or she could refuse, and I'd make sure everyone in the building knew exactly what kind of person she was by tomorrow morning. Ashley stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. She left my office in tears, practically running down the hallway. I waited until she turned the corner, then I opened my email and composed a message to Sabine Norris in HR requesting an urgent meeting. I attached the full investigation folder with all the testimony from Cyrus and the other former co-workers who watched Ashley systematically target a married department head. I included the timeline showing how she'd inserted herself into his life, befriended his wife, then slowly poisoned the marriage from the inside. I hit send and sat back in my chair. My hands were steady. My phone rang less than an hour later. Sabine asked me to come to her office immediately. When I walked in, she was already on the phone with Ingrid Pritchard, our company attorney. Both of them looked seriously concerned as they reviewed the evidence spread across Sabine's desk. Ingrid asked me direct questions about how I'd obtained the information, whether I'd contacted Ashley's previous employer, what prompted me to investigate. I answered everything honestly. I told them about the Project Sabotage, the social media campaign, the restaurant ambush with Tom's mom, the texts to my husband. I explained that Rita overheard Ashley on the phone saying she just needed a few more months to remind Tom what they had. Sabine made notes while Ingrid flipped through the folder again. Then Ingrid said something that surprised me. She told me this wasn't just workplace drama anymore. This was a liability issue with a documented predator targeting married employees. The company could be held responsible if they knew about Ashley's pattern and didn't act. Sabine told me the investigation would move faster than I expected. She said Ashley's employment would be terminated effective immediately, and security would escort her out today. I went back to my office and tried to focus on work, but I kept watching the clock. Around 3 p.m, I saw security walking across the parking lot toward the building. 15 minutes later, I watched from my window as they walked Ashley to her car. She was carrying a small box of her belongings. She looked up at my window and our eyes met. I didn't look away. I wanted her to know exactly who ended this and that I wasn't sorry. She got in her car and drove away. That evening, I told Tom everything. I showed him the folder, explained about the previous victims, laid out the systematic way Ashley targets marriages. He was horrified. He asked why I didn't tell him sooner, why I handled it alone. But then his expression changed, and he said he was more disturbed by how methodically I destroyed her career without giving him a chance to handle it himself. We had our first real fight about it. Tom said I went too far by contacting her previous employer and building a case like a prosecutor. I told him she was never going to stop. I said nice approaches don't work on people who see kindness as weakness to exploit. Tom got quiet for a long time. Then he admitted he was unsettled by how coldly I executed the whole plan, that he was seeing a side of me he didn't know existed. That hit me harder than I expected. I realized he was right. 3 months ago, I would have handled this through official channels and trusted the system. But Ashley taught me that sometimes you have to be ruthless to protect what's yours. We went to bed without really resolving anything. The next morning, Keith called me into his office and I braced for fallout. Instead, he thanked me for bringing the situation to HR before it became a bigger problem. He admitted he was completely fooled by Ashley's credentials and charm. He said he was impressed I documented everything so thoroughly and caught a pattern that could have caused serious problems for the company. Keith leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He told me something that made my stomach drop. The compliance team had been tracking irregularities in my project timelines for the past 2 months. They were starting to question my management capabilities. They thought I was the problem. My evidence folder cleared up the mystery of why only my work was affected. Keith said he should have noticed the pattern himself. He apologized for not catching it sooner. I felt this weird mix of relief and anger. Relief that my reputation was saved, but anger that I had to solve this problem myself while everyone questioned my competence. Keith asked if I needed anything from him going forward. I told him I'd handle it. That afternoon, I started making calls to my professional network. I kept the language careful and professional. I mentioned Ashley's termination for workplace misconduct without going into details. I said anyone considering her for a position should contact HR for the full story. Within 2 weeks, 3 companies in our industry called me as references when she applied for positions. I told them the truth about the pattern documented in her file. I explained about the previous married boss, the stalking, the systematic sabotage. One hiring manager thanked me for being so thorough. Another said they'd had a feeling something was off about her interview. The third one just went silent for a long moment before thanking me and hanging up. I didn't feel guilty. Ashley made her choices and I was protecting other people from becoming her next targets. But then Ashley started calling Tom directly. The first voicemail came on a Tuesday evening. She was crying, saying I ruined her life over jealousy. She claimed she was only being friendly and I twisted everything to make her look bad. Tom played it for me and I could hear the manipulation in every word. She left 4 more messages over the next week. Each one got more desperate. She said Tom was making a mistake staying with someone so controlling. She said I was insecure and paranoid. She said he used to love her spontaneity and now he was trapped with someone who documented everything like a lawyer. Tom blocked her number after the 5th message. He looked at me across the kitchen table and said he should have shut down her texts months ago. He said showing me everything didn't make it okay. He said he let her keep a door open because part of him was flattered and that was wrong. I appreciated him saying it, but it didn't erase the months of watching him read her messages with that little smile. 3 days later, Helen called Tom's phone. Ashley had contacted her crying about being fired unfairly. Helen wanted to know what really happened because Ashley made it sound like I had some personal vendetta. Tom handled the conversation. I could hear him explaining the full situation, including the previous victims. He told his mother about the documented pattern, the HR investigation, the evidence from Ashley's last job. Helen went quiet for a long time. Then she said she felt like an idiot for being so charmed at that restaurant dinner. She said Ashley played her perfectly, and she was sorry for not seeing through it. 2 weeks after Ashley's termination, I got an email from someone named Kayla Fernandez. The subject line said, "Thank you for stopping the pattern." I opened it and read about how Ashley had targeted Kayla's married boss at their previous company. The relationship destroyed his marriage and his career. He ended up losing custody of his kids in the divorce. Meanwhile, Ashley just moved on to her next victim like nothing happened. Kayla said she tried to warn people, but no one believed her until it was too late. She said she was grateful someone finally held Ashley accountable. The email hit me harder than I expected. I sat at my desk staring at the screen for 20 minutes. I realized I didn't just protect my marriage. I potentially saved someone else from going through what Kayla and that boss's wife experienced. The validation helped, but it didn't completely erase my discomfort with how ruthlessly I operated. I kept thinking about the look on Ashley's face when security walked her out. That week, Tom suggested we start couples counseling. He said this experience exposed cracks in how we communicate about threats and boundaries. I agreed because I knew he was right. We found a therapist who specialized in relationship issues and started going every Thursday evening. The therapist asked us to explain what happened from our own perspectives. Tom talked about feeling caught between his wife and his ex, about not wanting to seem controlling by shutting Ashley down too hard. I talked about watching the situation escalate and feeling like I had to handle it alone. The therapist helped us understand that my response was protective, but also revealed trust issues about Tom's ability to handle the situation himself. Through therapy, I admitted something I'd been avoiding. I was terrified Tom might actually have unresolved feelings for Ashley. That fear drove me to eliminate her completely, rather than trust our marriage could withstand her presence. Tom acknowledged he was flattered by her attention at first. He said he didn't shut it down as firmly as he should have because some part of him liked being pursued again. Hearing him say it out loud hurt, but it also made things clearer between us. 3 months after Ashley's termination, Keith called me into his office again. He told me I was promoted to Vice President of Clinical Research. The promotion was already in discussion before the Ashley situation, but my handling of a complex personnel issue demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking leadership requires. I thanked him and walked back to my office in a daze. The promotion felt validating but also complicated. I knew part of my success came from being willing to destroy someone's career to protect my own interests. I sat at my desk and looked at the new title on my email signature. I wasn't sure if that made me a strong leader or just someone who learned to be ruthless when necessary. I still felt weird about how calculated everything was, but Tom scheduled our next therapy session for Thursday. We sat in the therapist's office and she asked us to describe what we learned from the Ashley situation. Tom went first and talked about how he should have shut down her texts immediately instead of asking my permission each time. He said he realized that asking me if it was okay made me responsible for policing his boundaries when he should have just handled it himself. I listened and realized he was right because every time he asked me about coffee with Ashley, I felt trapped between looking jealous or letting it happen. The therapist asked me what I learned and I admitted I was scared Tom might still have feelings for Ashley, which is why I went nuclear instead of trusting him to handle it. Tom looked surprised and said he never realized I doubted him that much. We spent the rest of the session working out a new system where Tom promises to shut down inappropriate attention immediately without asking me first, and I promised to bring concerns to him before launching investigations. The therapist said we both made mistakes, but the fact we survived something this intense meant our marriage had a solid foundation. I left feeling like maybe we could actually be stronger for going through this. 2 weeks later, I stopped at the coffee shop near work to grab my usual latte. Rita was already there at a corner table and waved me over. She had this relieved look on her face and told me she needed to say something. She said the whole department noticed how much smoother everything ran without Ashley around. My projects were back on schedule, reports were getting submitted on time, and nobody was making weird comments about high school chemistry classes during meetings. Rita said several people privately thanked her for telling me what she overheard, because they could tell something was off but couldn't figure out what. She lowered her voice and said there was a general feeling that I protected the team by removing someone toxic, before she could damage more than just my work. I thanked her and felt this weird mix of validation and discomfort, because part of me still wondered if I went too far. 6 months passed and Tom got invited to present his autoimmune research at a big conference in Chicago. I took time off work to go with him because after everything we went through, I wanted to support his career the way he always supported mine. The conference was huge with researchers from pharmaceutical companies all over the country. We were at the reception when this woman approached Tom and asked if he remembered her from a project 3 years ago. They started talking and she mentioned she used to work with someone named Ashley, who moved around a lot between companies. Tom tensed up and I jumped in asking what she meant by moved around a lot. The woman said Ashley applied to her current company, but they passed because when they called references, multiple people mentioned workplace issues. She said it quietly, but other researchers nearby overheard, and a few of them nodded like they knew exactly who we were talking about. One guy said his company interviewed her last month but decided she wasn't a good fit. The quiet conversations confirmed what I suspected, that Ashley left the pharmaceutical industry entirely after being unable to find another position. Nobody said it directly, but the message was clear that word had spread about her pattern. Tom and I flew home the next day and spent the flight talking about everything. I admitted I should feel guilty about ending Ashley's career, but mostly I just felt relieved she couldn't target another marriage or sabotage another woman's work. Tom said he understood why I did what I did, even if the ruthlessness still made him uncomfortable sometimes. We landed and drove home, and that night Tom suggested we plan a vacation to celebrate my promotion. I pulled up travel websites and we started looking at beach resorts in Mexico. For the first time in months, I felt secure in my marriage and confident in my ability to protect what we built together. I knew some people would judge me for being so calculated about destroying Ashley's reputation, but sitting there planning our vacation with Tom, I couldn't bring myself to regret it.